I'm often asked, why buy real estate that you're not going to live in that often if you could simply rent on the short-term market? And today I'm going to tell you why I choose to buy than rent, and the answer is probably not what you're expecting. So I've been asked, why buy, rent, property, low gains, just aren't worth the taxes and maintenance costs, free yourself from the hassle. I've been told, why not just rent short-term, as I'm traveling around the world for business, for short-term engagements, for speaking, for whatever temporary purposes, if it's a property that you'll barely use. This is what folks have told me recently and over the years about the fact that I have assembled a portfolio of properties that I've enjoyed renovating, I've enjoyed decorating. I've sometimes used to leverage into residence and citizenship, and I'll talk more about that. But that I have assembled because I want places to stay around the world where I do business and where I enjoy spending time. And so today I'm going to answer the question of why not just rent? And if it's your first time here, I'm Andrew Henderson, founder of Nomad Capitalist. We're a boutique consulting firm that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. And what I want to call out first on this is, if you are in a Western country where taxes and maintenance costs and school taxes and all kinds of stuff is very high, understand that in other countries around the world, those costs are very low. A couple years ago, I did a video on what it costs to run 5 places, and I think it was like under or barely $10,000 to run 5 places. Now the number will be higher because I have a larger property or two that has, it's very well run, has great services, and that costs a bit more. But even with that, 6 places around the world is less than what the property tax is for many people I know who live in Long Island, New York. Just the property tax for 1 year, which they get really not much value back from that. On top of that, management of properties isn't that bad, partially because I have properties in places where I do business. And so, hey, if you're the office manager in Belgrade, you're responsible once a month for making sure bills are paid for, for my property. On top of that, I have people who assist with the property, and they get paid for doing that. And it's sometimes more flexible in some of these countries where I'm spending time, where you just have a friend who you do a little bit of business with, and they get a little bit of money, and they just handle making sure everything's paid. And so on top of that, you can also set up auto pay in countries, especially like Georgia, where bills just get paid, and the bills are very affordable, and it just gets taken to my bank account. And once a year, I make sure there's enough lari in there, and it just boop, takes the money out. And so managing properties isn't as difficult as you would think it is, especially in countries where they're not constantly sticking their hand out for more money. And so one reason why I believe in having a property portfolio is you can have residence and citizenship by investing in property. And so if you want to get a golden visa, you can often do that in Europe by buying a piece of property. Some countries in Latin America do the same. In Asia, not in Malaysia where I live, but in other countries, you can buy a property and get residence. And so sometimes that leads to the residence permit or citizenship that allows you to enjoy using that house and allows you to extend the fact that you can be there as long as you want, right? So if you're a resident, if you're a citizen, nobody's kicking you out. And while there may be tax considerations to keep in mind, if you spend too long, you're not stuck where you're forced to be moving. I think that being forced to stay in the move is something that I'm glad not to have, because I did spend years as a perpetual traveler. And this idea where, hey, the hotel, you've got your 3-week stay, and after 3 weeks, they're full with some conference, and you got to go. There's a little bit of kind of pressure that comes. And so if you're doing business, especially at a high level, that's going to start to really eat into you. I believe that you can only have so many stresses in life, and you want to eliminate as many as possible. And so if you want to live a global lifestyle, as I do, that funds the ability to save dramatically on taxes, that funds the ability to see the world, see the investment opportunities around the world, take part in different cultures, have an adventurous life, and if you have kids, I think expose them to different parts of the world, then the price of admission, from my perspective, if you can afford it, is having places where you can go. And so what I've done as a security-minded person is say, I'm going to have a single-digit percentage, depending on how you judge net worth, a very low single-digit percentage of property that's in paid-for real estate in places around the world that I can enjoy, that again, in some cases allows me to get the visa or the permission to stay there as long as I want, that I wouldn't otherwise have, and I would be on tourist visas, and so that all kind of works together. My philosophy is that we delegate too many parts of our life to people who simply don't care, whether it's food, whether it's housing. If you're staying in Airbnbs, and I did this for many years, hotels, nothing's prepared with love. You're staying in a place where housekeeping cleans your room and they don't really care. Everything's kind of done to a minimum standard. Food is prepared like in a commercial kitchen. Here you go. There's no love. And so I think that what a lot of people are looking for right now is especially if you're in a couple, if you've got a family, go and have a house. What I've set up with Mrs. H, we go out and buy, in places where we spend time, really nice cooking gear. She loves to cook. And so we get, the best. We've kind of built up over the years, like the best knives and like cooking, just like everything where the food is better. She enjoys doing it. She really gets in there and enjoys cooking stuff. You can do that. Like, you're not going to do that in an Airbnb. You're not going to do that in a hotel. You're not going to do that in a rental, right? I mean, imagine if you went and rented an apartment in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, for example, for a year. You're not going to probably, like, not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing if the landlord wants to kick you out after a year, not knowing where you're going to go. You don't have the certainty of, hey, I put money into a property that I own, I can leave stuff sitting there until the end of time. You're not going to invest in maybe some of those things, whether it's nicer clothing if you like that, whether it's nicer things to cook, like whatever it is, right? Now, do you need the best stuff to cook? No, you don't have to. You could get a cheap pot at IKEA and leave it behind. You could do that. But if you're a successful entrepreneur or investor, that's not going to create the kind of life that you want. So I think that you're kind of going against what you would have. My thought is, how do I create the best environment that I would have if I lived in one place where I was from? So all my friends who still live in the United States, if they're at the same financial level that I'm at, they have, and they enjoy cooking, they have the best knives. And so why would you want to deprive yourself of that? Because you didn't create the proper environment that allowed you to create something that felt like home, even though you have different homes. And so I've been there, I've done that. I've said, hey, I'm not going to be here that often, get the cheap IKEA stuff or get the bad pillows, whatever, and it just doesn't create the kind of lifestyle. And then people kind of get artificially forced back into, like, oh, screw it, I'm just going back to my home country because this life doesn't work. Well, no, it doesn't work because you don't treat it the same way you would, right? It's kind of like people who move from Naperville, Illinois, and they think if they go to Bogota, they're going to be living in the slums. It's like, no, you're going to be living in the Naperville, Illinois equivalent of Bogota. And so why don't you create the same home that you would have if you lived in Naperville, Illinois, if that's where you're from, and not mess around and don't deprive yourself. And so I want to take back control of key parts of my life. You don't know how bad staying in hotels are, especially corporate-run hotels, until you've spent well over 1,000 nights of your life there. You don't know just how bad they are about simple things like, hey, can I get a tea kettle because I like tea and I want to make my tea. I now carry teas the few times I have to go to hotels. I carry my own teas. I'll even bring my own diffuser. But if you want to rely on them, they're not reliable. If you're staying in an Airbnb, even less so, because who do you call, right? Hey, I need a tea kettle. I mean, how many of them are going to do that? And I've stayed in some expensive Airbnbs. They still don't have everything. On top of that, let's talk about short-term versus long-term. So if you're going to stay somewhere long-term, I can tell you from experience, having done one rental deal and having worked with other folks who have rented, landlords in other countries may not be the way landlords in your countries are. And it can, at times, be more challenging with some landlords keeping a property up than it would be just to own it, right? If you own a property, you can generally get a bank account. Now, the residence or citizenship that you get from owning it may also entitle you to a bank account, but if you're just going and renting a property somewhere on some lower category of visa, you may not be able to get an apartment. And so depending on where you are, what the currency is, whatever, how the landlord wants to operate. I mean, when I was in Malaysia and I rented, the only way we could handle payment for when I was leaving for 4 months, because it was a kind of a part-time base and I would travel from there, was I would meet the owner and I would take out cash, 1,500 ringgit at a time, like from different ATMs on different days, and be like, okay, the rent is 5,000 ringgit a month and I'm going to be gone for 3 months. Like, here's 15,000 ringgit that I ran all around town to get, because you can't have a bank account when you're just there as a renter. And okay, now you have things like Wise, but they're like, we just want to get money from your bank account to our bank account, and we want it a certain way, and here's the other wants to do it. And so you've got to play by their rules. And so for me, I understand that buying convenience is certainly worth something, but I also don't think you want to buy convenience at the price of giving up control. And so if you've got to say, hey, here's what the landlord wants, and that may inconvenience you, I'd much rather set up bills on auto pay with my local bank account and just let it be handled. That's a lot easier to handle remotely with all the infrastructure of being an owner than it is with being a renter. On top of that, I strongly believe, and not everyone agrees with this, but I strongly believe that in a long-term property, in that rental, it's like, hey, don't hang up any pictures. Here's your furniture. The furniture wasn't to my liking. I would have bought much better furniture. I would have hung up pictures. I wanted just too many white walls, not really conducive to getting stuff done. Could I have rented a more expensive place and had everything done? Sure. Not every country has that. And so are you going to change the entire selection of country that you're in because the rental inventory isn't that good? I mean, sorry, we have a team in Armenia and I love them. I've never seen a single apartment in Armenia that has decor that I would enjoy. Not one. Sorry. I don't like gold chandeliers hanging and diamonds and textured wallpapers. It's not my thing. It's their thing, and we can disagree. But if I wanted to have a property in Armenia where I had to go because I was managing that team, I would want to have control. You're not going to get a landlord to take out all the bad wallpaper. right, in their perfectly renovated property. So what I can do is I would buy a property that was totally, destroyed, basically, in a great part of town, where I can buy it for a little bit below market, and I can just go in and take this property, which needs to be gutted, and just design it the way I want from scratch. And potentially there's a value add in some countries where I could add a little bit of value to my balance sheet because I've improved this property and it could be resold, and perhaps it's unique and maybe it's the only property that some Westerner would want to buy in some places. But I would much rather do that than have the control. So I think if your goal is how do I get from making $5 million a year to $10 million a year, that's a lot easier to do in a place where you feel comfortable. And so if you're in a place where just the wallpaper feels weird, or the walls are empty, or just things aren't the way you want, that's a benefit to owning. And if you can take a small percentage of cash you've accumulated by living overseas and dramatically reducing your taxes, you should have more money that you can take and put into property as a small percentage of your net worth. On the short-term side, I just think that too many times I've stayed in places, whether it's hotels. I mean, Marriott hotels still think if you're a lifetime platinum member that their 2 meg internet is like an upgrade. It's like, congratulations, thanks for schlepping through our terrible hotels for the last 1,200 nights of your life. Have this 2 meg internet. It's like, guys, it's not 1997 anymore. A lot of Airbnbs aren't better. I stayed at one. And I know there's people who think every Airbnb is amazing and you must have done it wrong for all these years to get all these terrible Airbnbs. Yeah, I stayed in one once where the Airbnb was like, let me check if they promised you hot water. And so was that conducive? Right, when I was literally staying across the street from the property that's now my home in Bogota that I was renovating, and I had to be schlepping around Bogota trying to find a new place to stay because there was no hot water and the plugs were from the Nixon administration. I couldn't even plug in my stuff to work, and Airbnb was fighting me and giving Mrs. H her first warning. She's the nicest person on earth, and she's getting a first warning for saying, dude, there's no hot water at this Airbnb. There's Airbnbs where it's oh, you get a blender because we like making smoothies and the blenders don't work. And what are you going to buy a blender in Mexico City for 2 weeks? It's just so many problems. And yes, I've even stayed in some where it's $500 a night in emerging countries and stuff doesn't work. And then you're always worried about stuff. And I just don't like that. And so is this being too precise? Yeah, I'm a pretty hypersensitive person about my environment, and I've seen a dramatic improvement in mood and in productivity and in just kind of focus on growth by controlling environments in homes that I control. I know I can leave stuff there. When I go traveling around the world, I know I was gone from Kuala Lumpur for a year and a half. I didn't worry once for a second. If I had a long-term rental, I'd be what happened to my clothes? Did the owner kick me out? What's going on? How do I pay? What's the next step? What do we do? I just figured, hey, I've got all my stuff there. I'll come back to it when I come back to it. As long as the moths don't get it, so I hang cedar strips. I just think control of your environment is very valuable. And your focus in life should not be about how do I save a few bucks or how do I reinvest a few bucks. If you have $10 million and you can take $1 million and invest it in paid for property in a couple of different places you want to live, and you can get residence permits to live there by doing that, okay, the opportunity cost in that $1 million, number one, those properties may go up in value. Outside of the properties in Malaysia, where I know it's just a lifestyle investment because property is flat, there's too much supply, maybe in 20 years it'll do fine. Outside of that, I've done well to very well on properties, and so there's been some capital appreciation. I don't care about that, but my balance sheet is higher. But I still got the other $9 million to use, just in this example. And so if you took some percentage like that kind of scenario and you controlled your life, I think that the opportunity on that cost on that wouldn't be as different, wouldn't be as big as you think it is, and you'd spend a lot more time working in the other part of the portfolio because you wouldn't be thinking about how to service where you're living, how you're cooking in some shoddy kitchen, how you're ordering takeout. You would be focused entirely on growing your business, living your life. There's a lot less stress. Quite frankly, living overseas, the stresses of maintaining the properties pale in comparison to what I did when I was staying in vacation rentals, Airbnbs, and hotels. And so that's why I've decided to take a small percentage of my net worth and just throw that at properties. And if I find new places I want to live, I will continue to do so to make sure that I control my environment.